Folks, before you even start today's video, pause it and go over to shopwcbs.com and get yourself a world-class Bullshitters t-shirt. We just launched, we have some awesome designs, and we're going to be adding more monthly. We're going to treat the store as a reflection of the channel. We have a great joke on a show, we're going to put it on a shirt. We're also going to make it very interactive. If you buy our beer glass and drink with us, you'll get a shout out. It'll be like drinking with us virtually. So folks, go over to shopwcbs.com, support independent entertainment because the real world entertainment sucks. And now it's time for the video. Famed director Ridley Scott is back in the news, and it's not because of another Alien spin-off that's happening.
The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
Ridley Scott is one of the all-time great directors. He's known for such films as Alien, Blade Runner, Legend, those were all in a row, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, American Gangster, and many, many more. But today he's on everyone's radar for what he said about superhero films. There's been a surge in very public figures criticizing superhero films. In 2019, Martin Scorsese, another famed director whose filmography rivals Scott's, and for some surpasses it, had a few choice words about Marvel. Scorsese compared them to amusement parks over cinema. The world erupted. Ridley Scott has a different take. They're boring as shit. Ask Ridley Scott what he thinks of superhero movies, and he won't sugarcoat it. The best films are driven by the characters, and we'll come to superheroes after this if you want, because I'll crush it. I'll f***ing crush it. They're f***ing boring as shit, Scott recently told Deadline in an interview that has since drawn the ire of Marvel Cinematic Universe fans and comic book movie lovers on social media, adding, superhero movie scripts are not any fucking good. By his account, Scott has made 3 great scripted superhero movies. One would be Alien with Sigourney Weaver, one would be Gladiator, and one would be Harrison Ford in Blade Runner. They're superhero movies, so why don't the superhero movies have better stories? Sorry, I got off the rail, but I mean, come on. Superhero movies are mostly saved by special effects, and that's becoming boring for everyone who works with special effects, if you've got the money. I know he went off on a tangent, but I do agree that Ripley, Deckard, and Maximus are all superheroes, just like James Bond, Neo, and John Wick are superheroes. They don't need spandex or Marvel behind them. Just for the hell of it, let's find out what a superhero is, just in case Ridley Scott is off his rocker. According to Google, a superhero is a stock character that possesses superpowers, abilities beyond those of ordinary people, and fits the role of the hero, typically using his or her powers to help the world become a better place, or dedicating themselves to protecting the public and fighting crime. Abilities beyond those of other people. Ripley uses her intellect to defeat the xenomorph, just like Batman. Deckard uses his detective skills to hunt down replicants, aka killer robots. Batman's done that too. Maximus, a man who fights to survive and take down the man who killed his family. That also sounds a lot like Batman. I wonder if Ridley Scott is upset because they never let him make a Batman movie. Well, Ridley, the same thing happened to Steven Spielberg. A no from James Bond, and we got Indiana Jones out of it. And if adventure has a name, it must be Indiana Jones. He too fits Scott's definition of a superhero. What we're seeing is more and more public anti-Marvel sentiment. I've liked a lot of these movies, but they're changing the cinematic landscape and not for the better. If Scott's comments were made after 2018's Infinity War, I'd be livid. Up to that point, the MCU was the strongest it had ever been. But after that film, I started to understand the phrase Marvel fatigue a little better. I loved Infinity War, but Ant-Man and the Wasp was a chore to watch. Captain Marvel was a joke. And Endgame, well, it just wasn't for me. Spider-Man was okay, but the ending, that was amazing. 2021 is the year Marvel fatigue becomes real. Maybe I should call it Marvel Dread, because I dreaded seeing the 3 films released this year, with the Eternals being the worst. It's funny. It's like Marvel listened to all these criticisms, got a now Oscar-winning director, and still couldn't make an interesting character-driven story. The characters in the Eternals are stupid, they're ethnically diverse, but poorly written. That doesn't help your cause, Marvel. 2021 is also the year that the press got on board the anti-Marvel train as well. Outside of the scathing reviews for the Eternals, there has been other talk about too much superhero content across the board. Are people getting tired of Marvel movies? No genre or franchise remains dominant at the box office forever. Westerns and musicals, for example, were the go-to source for box office success in the first half of the 20th century, before sputtering out in the 1970s. Dystopian young adult novel adaptations, meanwhile, seemed omnipresent in pop culture, until they suddenly weren't, thankfully. There will also come a time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe is no longer the massive pop culture juggernaut. Just like the nefarious Thanos, it's unstoppable. But there's always been a question of when this will happen, with several seeming opportune moments for a backlash against the franchise. What inspired this question? Discussions about the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe were reignited by the box office performance of Black Widow. After scoring $80 million, the biggest box office debut since the coronavirus, this MCU feature fell 67% in its second weekend, grossing an additional $25.8 million. This was the second sharpest weekend drop ever for an entry in this franchise, and followed by a similarly abominable Friday to Saturday decline over its opening weekend. The film rebounded a bit in its third weekend, but its 55% drop at this frame was still far from the ideal hold. In the wake of these developments, especially after the second weekend drop at the Black Widow box office, Steven Zetchik of the Washington Post published a piece that didn't just explore the box office trajectory of the latest MCU feature, but also highlighted perspectives from assorted media analysts on what the film's finances mean for the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe. Most of it wasn't good. I assumed this would be bigger, more consistent hit, observed Joseph Siegel, a radio personality and prominent Disney expert. If Black Widow can only do what it did in its second weekend, there's part of me that says maybe people are a little tired of Marvel. That should make Disney worried. Meanwhile, others interviewed for the piece saw Black Widow's box office as being more indicative of faulty release strategies than an indictment of just one franchise. The notion of the Marvel Cinematic Universe being past its prime at the box office would have enormous consequences on countless fronts. For starters, Marvel Studios' parent company Disney would be quite unhappy with the thought that the MCU is no longer being the top dog, or even just reliably profitable at the worldwide box office. Since acquiring it in 2009, Walt Disney Pictures has come to rely on Marvel Studios to provide the company with a regular annual slate of incredibly successful blockbusters. This was apparent from the get-go when the first MCU title distributed by Walt Disney Pictures, The Avengers, became Disney's highest-grossing feature ever in North America at the time of its release. That level of success has endured throughout the years and inspired Disney, just before the pandemic, to announce an avalanche of MCU properties that would debut on Disney Plus and in theaters over the next decade. The studio's commitment to all things Marvel was apparent as late last week, just before Black Widow debuted, when Disney quietly revealed that the 2023 slate would be the first year that houses 5 separate Marvel Studio movies. If Black Widow's box office truly indicates decreasing interest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it would be a massive blow not only to these plans, but to Disney's future as a media entity. Avengers Endgame wasn't just a box office phenomenon, it was also the closing chapter in the Infinity Saga. With several beloved characters like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers bidding farewell, not to mention a cinematic blowout battle incorporating a staggering number of Marvel Cinematic superheroes, it was a massive adventure that truly felt like a fitting cap to years of storytelling. As a cherry on top, this conclusion also delivered unprecedented box office results that briefly made Avengers Endgame the biggest film of all time at the worldwide box office. How could the Marvel Cinematic Universe ever hope to top any of these ingredients for success? A question that may once have seemed like a fun challenge could be an ominous query in the current pop culture landscape. The biggest breakdown to creating something that functioned so well as a definitive ending that it gave a regular Marvel Cinematic Universe moviegoers a chance to step off this train. Even as the franchise barreled forward with constant announcements of further projects in development, many viewers could have used Endgame as a chance to pause their investment in this series. This opportunity was exacerbated by the pandemic, which afforded the audiences a 2-year gap which to divert their attention to other movies. If this actually did, Black Widow could be the first indicator that Avengers Endgame may have done its job a little too well in getting audiences to say farewell to the Avengers. Black Widow was the first title to arise in the wake of Marvel Studios releasing expensive TV event shows on Disney+. Programs like WandaVision and Loki took long-running MCU saga to a whole new domain of storytelling. The result of this expansion has been a slew of Emmy nominations, varying degrees of praise, and memes. Lots and lots of memes. But did bringing the MCU to the world of premium streaming end up detracting from the specialness of the franchise's theatrical release? It's possible. The week Black Widow came out, fans of the saga needed a Marvel Cinematic Universe fix didn't have to wait until the feature hit theaters. They could catch a new episode of Loki on Wednesday. The existence of these well-crafted shows may help Disney Plus stand out in the streaming landscape, but it's not a big leap to the imagination for them also diluting the uniqueness and urgency of theatrical productions like Black Widow. It isn't just on Disney Plus that the audiences have been inundated with Marvel projects. The marketing for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and the Eternals also kicked off 3 months leading up to Black Widow. These trailers, as well as announcements for merchandise from December's Spider-Man No Way Home, were meant to enhance the excitement surrounding all the future developments related to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, combine all these marketing materials with the near-weekly arrival of new episodes of MCU TV programs, and it's an unprecedented amount of simultaneous creative endeavors from one franchise. Despite the 2-year gap between Spider-Man Far From Home and Black Widow, the current content saturation makes it seem as almost if the MCU never left at all. And it wouldn't be surprising if the hurricane of franchise property all jostling for a place in 2021 sanded off the anticipation of the Black Widow. I'd like to jump back to the beginning.
The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
No, not that far. I want to talk about what Ridley Scott said about the superhero film. The best films are driven by characters, and we'll come to superheroes after this if you want, because I'll crush it. I'll fucking crush it. Yes, he would. Looking at his filmography, you can't call him shitty because you don't like his opinions. Both he and Scorsese are better than every Marvel director combined. Jon Favreau and the Russo brothers would agree too, as would Kevin Feige. Scott and Scorsese, attorneys at law, are 2 living legends who have made films better than the MCU. Ridley Scott making a superhero movie means it's going to be interesting. If he directed the Eternals, he'd have made it interesting. Okay, I don't know if that's actually possible. What I think is happening with the MCU and all superhero films in general is the law of diminishing returns, which states that in the production process, increasing a factor of production by 1 unit while holding all other production factors constant will at some point return a lower unit of output per incremental unit of input. 2 of the last 3 MCU films cost over $200 million. The break-even for Black Widow was $500 million. Disney Plus and theaters brought in $501 million. The Eternals was another $200 million film, and it's sitting at $265 million globally, with no Disney Plus money coming in to sweeten the deal. These last 3 MCU movies kind of confirm what people like Scott and Scorsese are saying. All of this won't matter though once the Spider-Man trailer drops. That's the control Marvel has over everyone.